Did you know that during the early days of Dead by Daylight, there was literally no Endgame Collapse? After completing all 5 generators, survivors would just, open the exit gates, which back then took only 15 seconds compared to the current 20, and nothing interesting would really happen. The exit gates would open and you would just stand there. The endgame as a whole was really kind of anticlimactic back then. This is actually one of the main reasons for why the Endgame Collapse was eventually added to the game. Not only was this a much needed buff for the killer site during that time, but this new mechanic also improved the overall trial experience, as according to the DBD Wiki, the Endgame Collapse raises the stakes, urging the killer and the survivors to make tough decisions while under the pressure of a timer. Fun fact, the reason for this mechanic to even be considered in the first place was actually the way how the original hatch functioned. Now, I'm not going to go into much detail, but basically the hatch was very problematic during the early days of Dead by Daylight. And so, in order to fix this, the developers tested 2 different iterations of the hatch closing mechanic during the 2.0.0 public test build. In the first iteration, closing the hatch required the last survivor to repair another generator in order to reopen the hatch. This idea, however, was discarded rather swiftly, as neither the developers nor part of the community were satisfied with how the changes played out in the PTB. And it also opened up other problems which led to the developers deciding to revisit the entire endgame situation instead of just the hatch alone. Ultimately, the second iteration, where closing the hatch powers all remaining generators, requiring the last survivor to open an exit gate instead, was chosen as the one to be implemented alongside the other endgame related changes with the introduction of the 2.7.0 update. What's up everyone, my name is Sashko, and about a month ago I made a video titled Things that we nowadays take for granted in DBD, and some of you really seemed to enjoy that one, so I thought why not make a part 2 of it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this one as well, and now let's get back into the video. Many people who've started to play Dead by Daylight recently might not know that during the first couple years of the game's existence, skill checks were extremely laggy. And it wasn't really because people were playing on bad or low-end devices either. See, this was mainly because VSync was turned on by default, which for some video games can really make the overall playing experience a lot better. However, there is one major downside to having VSync enabled. Now, VSync is known to actually cause quite a bit of input delay, meaning that instead of being able to press the button while the skill check was in the success zone, you had to do it a bit earlier. This was of course compounded by the fact that the actual pointer would also move as if your game was running at 20 FPS. Since for some reason the developers thought that it was a good idea to add VSync into a game that had quick time events like, for example, skill checks in Dead by Daylight. But this wouldn't have been a problem if you were able to turn off VSync from the in-game settings, which actually wasn't the case. In order to disable VSync, players had to manually open and edit their config files using a text editor. And funnily enough, people even made guides on how to do this. And so this was the reality for Survivor players for multiple years. Thankfully though, today VSync can be turned on and off through the in-game options, and so this has largely not been a problem for quite some time now. Originally, the Bloodweb was incredibly grindy. First of all, there were pretty much no significant blood point offerings, as there were no cakes, no puddings, no bloody party streamers, no envelopes, and the category ones also gave you a smaller blood point boost overall. Additionally, there were no Blood Rush or Blood Hunt mini-events, no matchmaking incentives, and not even the occasional daily login rewards. The actual very original Bloodweb was a huge pain in the back to deal with. Honestly, I can go on and on about all the things that were different about it in the past, however that's going to take a lot of explaining, and I'm thinking of doing a whole separate video on that anyway, so I'll just briefly mention the main couple of factors. First of all, nodes were more expensive overall, the Bloodweb spawned very few perks if any at all, and lower level Bloodwebs were generally much larger than the current iterations. This state of the Bloodweb thankfully got changed relatively early on, and so only about half a year after DBD's release date, the Bloodweb grind was significantly reduced. Also, this patch was the one that added the legacy cosmetics as a reward for players that had prestiged their characters before this change. Over the years, the Bloodweb continued to receive several quality of life changes, including reducing the cost of nodes several times, making the overall animations faster and more responsive, until fairly recently when the Bloodweb received the biggest quality of life change to date, that being the implementation of the auto node purchase button. And yet, some people are still somehow saying that blood points take way too long to spend. Even though solo queue received a huge buff in a fairly recent update with the introduction of the status HUD icons, which show the types of actions that survivors are currently performing, a lot of players are of the opinion that queuing and playing as a solo survivor still doesn't feel very good. But did you know that in the past, not only were there no action indicators for survivors, but instead the whole entire HUD conveyed less information overall. For example, as a survivor, you couldn't see which hook stage your teammates were on, and as a killer the hook counter didn't exist. Players couldn't even see the icons of the different survivors. Instead, the HUD simply showed this white outline of a generic body shape. Furthermore, originally you also couldn't see the add-ons of your power or of the item that you were holding. All of this was later changed, however, but not without a minor fuck up. I mean, seriously, how did anyone think that this was a good idea? Anyways, even though the current HUD definitely shows a lot more information compared to the previous one, I can't deny, and I'm still of the opinion, that the original look fit the game a little better. Nonetheless, what do you guys think about this? Let me know down in the comments. For almost 7 entire years, Dead by Daylight literally had no perk search bar. Now, this wasn't a big problem during the beginning, as in 2016 there weren't many perks in the game. However, as DBD started to evolve throughout the years, more and more perks were implemented, which increased the overall count of the perk pages in the inventory. This was starting to become a problem not only because of the sheer amount of perks, but also because originally perks weren't just yellow at tier 1, green at tier 2 and purple at tier 3, but instead some perks were green at tier 3 while others were pink. Because of this, many perks weren't displayed in an alphabetical order, instead it was more like a weird mixture between them being sorted by rarity and by letters, which was very confusing for players that were just trying to find where the hell a specific perk was. Eventually though, perk tier rarities got completely reworked into the current system, however there were still far too many perks in the game. The community even made concepts on what a search bar for perks might look like, and so after almost 7 whole years, the developers finally implemented the long-awaited search bar into the base game. Well, yeah, I guess that was it. This was part 2 of the things in Dead by Daylight that we nowadays take for granted. Let me know if you guys enjoy these types of videos and whether I should continue this series, I guess you could call it. Anyways, if you liked the video, make sure to leave a like down below, and also I would be glad if you considered subscribing as well. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!